Question number 6, Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā koutou te whare. My question is to the Minister for Building and Housing and asks, ka tū a ia, I rongi te mana o tana kōrero, quote, the proportion of New Zealanders living in rental homes is not changing dramatically and owner-occupiers will remain the dominant living arrangement for most Kiwi families into the future, end quote. I te mea, e ai ki ngā tatauranga hou, no maia no I te tau Kotahi mano iwarau rima tekau mā tahi, I taka ai I te hunga whiwhi, I tōna ake whare ki raro rano.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick.
Yes, the latest census data has home ownership at 65%, which is more than double the 31% that are renting. The 65% compares to 68% in 2001. A decline of 3% since 2001 is not dramatic, and I am confident it will be reversed by the wide-ranging housing program the government has underway, of which the most important is freeing up land supply and reform of the RMA that the Greens have consistently opposed.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is the Minister aware that more than half of all Aucklanders live in rental homes, according to Statistics New Zealand?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick.
Mr Speaker, there is no question that the issues in Auckland are connected to the flawed policies of a metropolitan urban limit that have seen house prices more than treble, and it is ironic for the Greens that have actually championed those tight urban constraints that they now complain about its consequences. The important thing is that the government has broke that through the use of both the special housing areas and now Auckland's new unitary plan.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Why is the Minister trying to deflect blame when under this government's watch, Auckland is now the most expensive city in the world to buy a home in relative to incomes?
Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
No, I dispute that. I was in Sydney last week meeting with the Housing Minister of New South Wales, and actually house prices in Sydney have been similar to those in Auckland, and interestingly last Friday they embarked on a reform program very similar to the new unitary plan and the new policy statements around urban development that will free up land supply and make homes more affordable for peoples like City and Auckland.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Simon O'Connor.
To the Minister, how has the affordability of home ownership changed since 2000, and what measures does the government have in place to improve affordability?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, home affordability was hammered during the period 2000 to 2008, when average national house prices doubled and interest rates went from 6% to 11%. Since 2008, interest rates have more than halved to the lowest level in 60 years. Owning a home is actually now 30% more affordable on average across New Zealand than we became the government. The exception is Auckland, where poor planning policies have artificially driven up land prices, but the combination of new supply and the unitary plan is now seeing the house prices there cool.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
In response to the Minister's admission that Auckland housing is a crisis, will he consider implementing the Green Party's progressive ownership rent-to-buy program that would help Kiwi families, especially those in Auckland, into their first home and save them more than $100 a week compared to a commercial mortgage?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I have seen the Green Party's housing policies, and they rely on voodoo economics. That is, that somehow that the government, just like Labor, the Minister of Finance does make the correct analogy that Labor and the Greens, in promising to build 100,000 homes with less than 1% of the money that's required, is nothing more than a joke.
Supplementary.
Order.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister expect that home ownership rates will continue to fall, given that people who are earning decent incomes, who would traditionally have been able to buy their homes, are now shackled with student debt and for many years after they graduate?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr. Nick
No,
Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I am confident that Kiwi families will improve their home ownership when the government's policies, through, for instance, the new unitary plan, there has been a trebling in the amount of government support through Home Start for first home buyers. There's also been an increase to $500 million a year of support through the Kiwi Saver schemes, and it is the maturing of those initiatives that will reverse a trend that has been 25 years long.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Is the Minister denying the evidence that came out today that first home buyers are now having to borrow something like $400,000 in order to afford their own home? And what does it say about the government's economic mismanagement that university graduates who used to be able to afford to buy their own home now cannot do so because the prices are too high?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Dr. Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I note that if those figures are translated, and it's actually not 400,000, but $340,000 is the average first home mortgage, and with interest rates at the lowest level that they have been in 60 years, a person would be paying less on average than they would by rent. But the greatest irony I find in the Greens Party policy that they just announced this week is that they're going to provide the maximum support for university graduates who actually have the highest rates of home ownership, and that's where the government's Home Start scheme is far more equitable.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria
Why
Turei.
doesn't the Minister just admit that his government's housing and economic policies have failed when even highly educated, well-paid university graduates cannot afford to buy their own home in this country?
Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable
Quite
Dr.
the
Nick Smith.
contrary, I would draw the members' attention to the latest OECD report that shows that the New Zealand economy is performing better than pretty much any other economy in the OECD. And secondly, in respect of housing, the boom in the level of housing that is being built across New Zealand, now up to nearly 30,000 homes per year, shows that the government measures to increase supply are working.
Question